I was folding laundry in my Phoenix apartment when my phone exploded with the most terrifying sound I had ever heard. My 16-year-old daughter, Emma, was screaming so hard, her voice cracked through the static. Grandma Patricia, Grandpa Harold, and Aunt Susan had left her stranded in the middle of the Arizona desert during their family camping trip. No water, no shelter temperature climbing past 115 degrees. Emma's voice broke as she whispered that her phone battery was dying. The line went dead. When I called my mother, her cold response froze my blood. "She'll be fine, Vicky. She just needed some space to think about her attitude." My hands trembled as I grabbed my car keys and emergency kit, my mind racing with 1,000 horrible possibilities. The drive to Joshua Tree National Park stretched endlessly before me, 4 hours of desert highway, while my daughter baked somewhere in that merciless wilderness. I called every number I could think of while speeding down Interstate 10. Park rangers, local police, even the sheriff's department. Each conversation felt like precious minutes slipping away while Emma suffered. The campground was a scattered collection of RVs and tents, nestled between massive boulder formations that looked like ancient sentinels guarding secrets. I found my family's luxury motorhome parked in the premium section, complete with satellite TV and air conditioning humming peacefully. The contrast between their comfort and Emma's desperate situation made my stomach churn with rage. My mother, Patricia, sat under the motorhome's awning sipping iced tea from a crystal glass while reading a romance novel. Her silver hair was perfectly styled despite the desert heat, and she wore a spotless white linen outfit that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. She looked up at me with the same dismissive expression she had perfected over my 35 years of life. "Well, look who finally decided to show up," Patricia said without setting down her book. "I suppose Emma called you with some dramatic story about being abandoned. That girl has always been prone to exaggeration, just like her mother." My father, Harold, emerged from the motorhome carrying a beer bottle, his face flushed from the air conditioning transition. His khaki fishing vest was covered in expensive gadgets and tools, none of which he had apparently used to help find his missing granddaughter. He settled into a folding chair with a grunt and adjusted his sun hat. "Emma needed to learn some respect," Harold said matter-of-factly, taking a long swig of beer. "Kids these days think they can mouth off to their elders without consequences. A little time alone in nature will straighten out her attitude real quick." My sister Susan poked her head out of the motorhome, her blonde hair pulled back in a perfect ponytail that somehow remained immune to humidity and desert wind. She wore a designer camping outfit that looked like it came straight from a catalog photo shoot. Her makeup was flawless despite the heat, and she carried herself with the same entitled confidence that had irritated me since childhood. "Oh, good Vicky's here," Susan said with mock relief. "Maybe now you can talk some sense into that daughter of yours. Do you know what she said to Mom at Thanksgiving?" She actually told Patricia that her comments about Emma's appearance were inappropriate and hurtful. Can you imagine the audacity? The pieces began falling into place with sickening clarity. This wasn't a spontaneous punishment or a moment of poor judgment. My family had orchestrated this entire situation as some twisted form of revenge against Emma for defending herself and standing up for me. They had planned this camping trip specifically to isolate Emma in a place where they could exert total control over her. "Where exactly did you leave her?" I demanded, my voice barely controlled. "I need coordinates, landmarks, anything." Patricia finally looked up from her book with an expression of mild annoyance. "Somewhere out there." She waved vaguely toward the endless expanse of desert and rock formations. Harold drove her about 5 miles up one of those hiking trails and told her to walk back to camp when she was ready to apologize for her behavior. She should have been back hours ago if she really wanted to return. 5 miles, I could barely breathe. In this heat, without water. "She had a small water bottle," Harold said defensively, "and we told her exactly which direction to walk. It's not like we dumped her on Mars. This is character-building exercise. My father did the same thing to me when I was her age, and it made a man out of me." Susan nodded approvingly. Emma has been getting way too comfortable challenging authority figures. She questioned Patricia's advice about her weight. She argued with Harold about politics, and she even had the nerve to suggest that we were being mean to you, Vicky. Someone needed to teach her that actions have consequences. My heart pounded as I realized the full scope of their planning. They hadn't just decided to punish Emma on a whim. They had spent weeks, maybe months, plotting this elaborate psychological warfare campaign against a child whose only crime was developing enough self-respect to recognize emotional abuse. I fumbled for my phone to call the park rangers again, but Patricia's voice stopped me cold. "Before you go running to the authorities," she said with a satisfied smile, "you might want to know that we documented everything properly. Harold has a written record of Emma's behavioral issues. Susan filmed her disrespectful outbursts during family dinners, and I have a detailed journal describing her increasingly defiant attitude. If anyone comes asking questions, we have plenty of evidence that Emma is a troubled teenager who ran away from a family camping trip because she didn't want to follow basic rules." The trap was even more elaborate than I had imagined. My family hadn't just abandoned Emma in the desert. They had built an entire false narrative to protect themselves from accountability, while ensuring that Emma would be blamed for whatever happened to her. The cold calculation behind their cruelty took my breath away. But then Harold made a mistake that revealed just how far their planning had gone. "Don't worry," he said with a dismissive chuckle. "We made sure to choose the most remote section of the park. No cell towers, no other campers, no easy ways out. If Emma really wants to come back and apologize, she'll have to work for it. Sometimes the best lessons are the hardest ones." The admission hung in the desert air like a confession. They had deliberately selected the most dangerous possible location to strand a 16-year-old girl. This wasn't discipline or character building. This was calculated endangerment designed to break Emma's spirit through fear and suffering. As I stared at my family's comfortable setup, the generator powering their air conditioning, the cooler full of cold drinks, the awning providing perfect shade, one terrible realization crystallized in my mind. They weren't worried about Emma because they didn't care if she got hurt. In their twisted worldview, any suffering she endured would be justified punishment for daring to challenge their authority. But I was about to show them exactly what real consequences looked like. I called the park rangers while driving toward the trailhead. Harold had described my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone steady. The ranger station connected me to Miguel Torres, a search and rescue coordinator, whose calm professionalism provided the first thread of hope I had felt since receiving Emma's terrifying call. "Ma'am, I need you to focus on the details," Ranger Torres said in a voice trained to cut through panic. "You said your family left your daughter at approximately what time?" "They said they drove out around noon," I replied, checking my dashboard clock. It was now past 6 in the evening. "She's been out there for over 6 hours in this heat." "That's approaching critical time," Torres acknowledged grimly. "The temperature reached 117 degrees today, and we have another hour of full sun exposure before any relief. I'm dispatching a helicopter immediately and calling in additional ground teams." I reached the trailhead where Harold claimed to have dropped Emma and found nothing but endless stretches of rock and scrub brush extending toward distant mountains. The landscape was beautiful and absolutely merciless. Every direction looked identical to my untrained eyes, just variations of beige stone and sparse vegetation baking under a sun that seemed to have malicious intent. My phone buzzed with a text from Susan. "Any word from Emma, yet Mom says dinner is ready if she wants to come back and apologize." The casual tone made my stomach turn. While I searched desperately for signs of my daughter's passage through this hostile environment, my family was settling down to a comfortable meal in their air-conditioned motorhome. They genuinely seemed to believe that Emma would simply materialize at their campsite, properly chastened and grateful for the lesson they had taught her. Ranger Torres arrived within 30 minutes, accompanied by 2 other Park Service vehicles and a team of volunteers from the local search and rescue organization. The contrast between their urgent efficiency and my family's indifference was stark and telling. "This area is particularly dangerous," Torres explained as he studied topographical maps spread across the hood of his truck. "We have numerous hidden ravines, unstable rock formations, and several old mining shafts that aren't marked on recreational maps. A person experiencing heat exhaustion could easily become disoriented and wander into extremely hazardous terrain." One of the volunteers, a weathered woman named Janet, who had clearly spent decades navigating desert conditions, pointed to a series of contour lines on the map. If she was trying to get to higher ground for cell phone reception, there are several rocky outcrops she might have attempted to climb, but the approach routes are treacherous, especially for someone without proper equipment or experience. As the search teams organized, I drove back to the campground to press my family for more specific information about exactly where they had left Emma. I found them sitting around a portable table enjoying what looked like a gourmet camping meal, complete with wine and cloth napkins. "Any luck finding our little runaway?" Patricia asked without looking up from her plate. "I told you she would turn up when she got hungry enough. Emma has always been dramatic, but she's not stupid. She knows which side her bread is buttered on." "She's been missing for 7 hours," I said, my voice tight with control. "The park rangers say that's approaching critical time for heat exposure. This isn't a game." Harold wiped barbecue sauce from his chin and shrugged. "Look, Vicky, I understand you're worried, but Emma needed to learn that her attitude has consequences. If we go running after her every time she throws a tantrum, we're just enabling her disrespectful behavior. Sometimes tough love requires being tough." Susan nodded sagely while sipping her wine. "Besides, kids are more resilient than we give them credit for. Emma is smart and resourceful. This experience will teach her self-reliance and help her appreciate what she has. It's really a gift when you think about it properly." Their complete disconnect from the gravity of the situation was staggering. While Emma fought for survival somewhere in the desert darkness that was rapidly approaching, my family discussed her ordeal like it was a character-building exercise at summer camp. "I need the exact coordinates where you left her," I demanded. "The search teams require precise locations to be effective." "We didn't use GPS coordinates," Harold said dismissively. "I've been camping in this area for decades. I drove up the old mining trail until we reached that big boulder formation that looks like a sleeping elephant, then told Emma to follow the trail markers back to the main campground. It's straightforward navigation if you pay attention to your surroundings." But when Ranger Torres examined the area, Harold described the situation became even more alarming. The old mining trail had multiple branches and several sections where flash flood damage had washed away the original markers. Even experienced hikers occasionally became disoriented in that specific region, and Emma had never been in this desert before. "There's something else you should know," Torres said quietly as we studied the maze of possible routes Emma might have taken. "We've had 3 heat-related fatalities in this area over the past 18 months. 2 were experienced adults with proper equipment who simply underestimated how quickly desert conditions can become deadly." As the helicopter's searchlight began sweeping the terrain, I realized that my family's cruel punishment might have escalated into something far more tragic than they had anticipated. But even worse than their initial cruelty was their continued refusal to take responsibility for what they had set in motion. When I returned to their campsite one more time to beg for additional details that might help the search teams, I overheard Susan talking on her cell phone. "Oh, it's just family drama," she was saying in a bored tone. "Emma is acting out again, and now Vicky is making a huge production out of it. You know how teenagers are when they don't get their way? We'll probably find her sulking behind some rocks waiting for enough attention." The casual dismissal of Emma's genuine peril revealed something that chilled me more than the desert night air beginning to settle around us. My family wasn't just unconcerned about Emma's safety. They were actively minimizing the situation to avoid accountability even as search helicopters circled overhead and volunteer teams combed through dangerous terrain in the darkness. But their most shocking revelation was still to come. As I was about to leave their campsite again, Patricia called out with what seemed like an afterthought. "Oh, Vicky, there's one small thing we probably should mention," she said in the tone someone might use to discuss forgetting to buy milk at the grocery store. Emma had one of her breathing episodes right before Harold dropped her off. You know how she gets when she's upset. We took her inhaler away because we thought she was just being manipulative, trying to get sympathy and avoid her punishment. The words hit me like a physical blow. Emma had exercise-induced asthma that could be triggered by stress, physical exertion, or extreme heat. Her inhaler wasn't a comfort item or a crutch. It was life-saving medication that she needed to breathe properly under exactly the conditions my family had subjected her to. "You took her inhaler—" I could barely form the words. "She could die from respiratory distress before dehydration even becomes a factor." Patricia waved her hand dismissively. "Emma has been using that inhaler as an excuse to avoid physical activities for years. We thought some real challenge might help her develop actual resilience instead of relying on medical props every time things get difficult." The scope of their recklessness was breathtaking. They hadn't just stranded Emma in the desert without water during dangerous heat. They had deliberately removed her access to emergency medication while forcing her into the exact conditions most likely to trigger a serious asthma attack. As I raced back to inform the search teams about this critical medical information, one terrible thought echoed in my mind. My family's attempt to break Emma's spirit might have escalated into an unintentional attempt on her life. While the search helicopter continued its sweeping pattern overhead, I sat in Ranger Torres's vehicle, trying to process the full scope of what my family had done. The medical information about Emma's inhaler had transformed this from a search and rescue operation into a potential medical emergency with a ticking clock. Heat-induced asthma attacks can become life-threatening very quickly in these conditions, Torres explained as he radioed the information to all search teams. Even if your daughter finds shade and conserves her energy, the combination of extreme heat, physical stress, and respiratory distress could create a medical crisis within hours. I was scrolling through my phone contacts to call Emma's pediatrician for additional medical details when I discovered something that made my blood run cold. Text messages between Patricia, Harold, and Susan from the past month revealed that this desert abandonment was just the culmination of weeks of coordinated planning. The earliest message was from Patricia to Susan dated 3 weeks ago. "Emma is getting too comfortable questioning our decisions. We need to remind both her and Vicky, who really runs this family. I have an idea that will solve both problems permanently." Susan's response, "Whatever you're planning, count me in. Emma's attitude at Thanksgiving was completely unacceptable. Someone needs to put that girl back in her place." Harold had joined the conversation the following day. "I've been looking at some remote camping areas where we could take Emma for a proper attitude adjustment, somewhere far enough from civilization that she'll appreciate what she has when we decide to bring her back." The messages continued for weeks with my family discussing logistics, timing, and their expected outcomes from what they euphemistically called Emma's character-building exercise. They had researched the most isolated areas of Joshua Tree National Park, specifically looking for locations without cell phone coverage or easy access to help. But the most disturbing messages revealed that their target wasn't just Emma. They were angry that Emma had started defending me against their constant criticism and manipulation. My daughter's growing ability to recognize emotional abuse had threatened their control over both of us. Patricia's message from 2 weeks ago spelled it out clearly. "Emma keeps telling Vicky that we're being unfair and manipulative. She's giving Vicky ideas about setting boundaries and standing up for herself. We can't allow a 16-year-old to undermine the family structure we've spent decades establishing." Susan's reply was even more revealing. "If we handle this correctly, we can break Emma's defiant spirit and remind Vicky of the consequences when she lets her daughter get too independent. 2 birds with 1 stone." They hadn't just planned to abandon Emma as punishment for her own behavior. They had orchestrated this entire situation to terrorize both of us into submission, using my daughter's safety as leverage to control my own decisions and relationships. The manipulation went even deeper. Harold's messages revealed that they had been deliberately provoking Emma during family gatherings, making increasingly harsh comments about her appearance, intelligence, and future prospects, then documenting her natural defensive responses as evidence of her bad attitude and disrespectful behavior. "We need to create a clear pattern showing that Emma is out of control," Harold had written. "That way, when we implement our solution, everyone will understand that we had no choice but to take drastic measures." My hands shook as I read message after message detailing their calculated campaign to manufacture justification for what they were planning to do to my daughter. They had spent weeks building a false narrative of Emma as a problematic teenager who needed extreme intervention, all while deliberately creating the very conflicts they would later use as evidence. But the most chilling discovery was a voice memo Susan had sent to the group chat just 3 days before the camping trip. I played it back with growing horror as her cheerful voice described their ultimate goals. "I really think this camping intervention could be exactly what we need," Susan said in the recording. "If Emma learns that challenging our authority leads to serious consequences, she'll stop encouraging Vicky to question us too. And if Vicky sees what happens when she doesn't control Emma properly, she might finally remember her place in this family hierarchy." The recording continued with Patricia's voice in the background. "The best part is that everyone will blame Emma for whatever happens. We're just concerned grandparents and a loving aunt trying to help a troubled teenager. If she gets hurt because she refused to follow simple instructions, that's on her, not on us." They had planned everything. The remote location, the medical emergency, even the cover story they would tell authorities and other family members. Emma's potential suffering wasn't an unfortunate side effect of their discipline. It was the intended outcome designed to terrorize her into permanent submission. But their conspiracy went even further than I had imagined. As I continued reading through their messages, I discovered they had also been researching my work schedule, Emma's school activities, and even my financial situation. They knew exactly when and how to implement their plan for maximum impact. Harold's message from last week revealed their complete strategy. "I've confirmed that Vicky has that important client presentation on Monday, so she'll be completely distracted and won't be checking on Emma as closely as usual. If we implement our plan during the weekend camping trip, we'll have maximum time before Vicky even realizes something is wrong." They had timed Emma's abandonment to coincide with my work obligations, hoping that critical hours would pass before I could respond effectively. They wanted Emma to suffer long enough to break her spirit, but not so long that serious legal consequences would follow. The calculation behind their cruelty was breathtaking. This wasn't angry relatives acting impulsively. This was a coordinated psychological warfare campaign designed to destroy a child's sense of security and self-worth while maintaining plausible deniability about their true intentions. But the most shocking revelation was still hidden in their messages, and when I found it, I understood that Emma and I had been living with people who were capable of far worse than I had ever imagined. In a message exchange from just 5 days ago, Patricia had written, "If this camping lesson doesn't solve our Emma problem permanently, we might need to consider more direct approaches. I've been researching legal options for having Vicky declared an unfit mother. If we can get custody of Emma and control of her trust fund, we can handle her education and attitude adjustment without any interference." Susan's response made my blood freeze. "I like how you think, Mom, and if something were to happen to Vicky during one of her frantic drives to rescue Emma, well, accidents happen all the time, especially when people are driving recklessly through dangerous areas while emotionally distraught." They hadn't just planned to abandon Emma in the desert. They had discussed scenarios where I might die in a car accident during my desperate search, leaving them as Emma's guardians with access to her inheritance from her deceased father. The camping trip wasn't just child abuse, it was a potential setup for something much darker. As I sat in the ranger's vehicle reading evidence of my family's systematic planning to destroy both my daughter and myself, the searchlight from the helicopter continued sweeping across the desert landscape. Somewhere in that darkness, Emma was fighting for survival against dangers she couldn't even comprehend, while the people who were supposed to love and protect her celebrated the success of their calculated cruelty. But they had made one critical error in their elaborate planning. They had underestimated how far I would go to protect my daughter, and they were about to discover that a mother's fury could be far more dangerous than any desert. Emma had been missing for 10 hours when the helicopter pilot reported the first promising lead. Thermal imaging had detected a heat signature near an abandoned mining area, approximately 6 miles from where my family claimed to have dropped her off. The distance meant Emma had been walking in the wrong direction, deeper into the most dangerous section of the park. The good news is that we've found signs of movement, Ranger Torres reported over his radio. The concerning news is that the movement patterns suggest disorientation. Your daughter appears to have been walking in circles for several hours. I stared at the topographical map spread across the hood of the search vehicle, trying to understand how Emma could have become so lost. The trail markers Harold had mentioned were clearly visible during daylight hours, but as Janet from the search team explained, heat exhaustion could impair judgment and spatial reasoning within hours of exposure. When people start experiencing hyperthermia, they often make decisions that seem logical in their compromised state, but actually increase their danger, Janet said gently. Your daughter might have thought she was walking toward help when she was actually moving further from safety. The mining area where Emma's heat signature had been detected was a maze of unstable shafts, loose rock formations, and hidden drop-offs that posed serious risks, even for experienced hikers with proper equipment. If Emma had fallen into one of the deeper shafts, rescue would become exponentially more complicated and time-sensitive. My phone buzzed with another message from my family, and this time the casual tone pushed me past my breaking point. Patricia had texted, "Still no word from our little explorer. Mom's heating up leftovers in case she decides to come home hungry. Kids always come back when their stomachs start rumbling." I drove back to their campsite with the search team's permission, determined to extract every piece of information that might help locate Emma before the situation became irreversible. I found my family exactly where I had left them hours earlier, relaxing under their awning as if nothing extraordinary was happening. "Any luck with your little drama production?" Susan asked, not bothering to look up from the magazine she was reading. "I told you Emma would turn up when she was ready. She's probably hiding somewhere close by, waiting for you to promise her a shopping trip or some other bribe to come back." Harold was cleaning his fishing gear with the methodical precision of someone who had all the time in the world. "You know, Vicky, your constant worrying isn't helping anyone. Emma needs to learn that actions have consequences, and if you keep running to her rescue every time she faces a challenge, you're just enabling her victim mentality." "She's been missing for 10 hours, I said through clenched teeth. "Search helicopters are flying overhead. This isn't a tantrum or a learning experience. This is a medical emergency." Patricia set down a romance novel with an exaggerated sigh. "Emma has always been prone to dramatics, just like you were at her age. Remember when you claimed you were sick to avoid that family reunion, and it turned out you just wanted attention? Emma is probably sitting behind some rocks right now, planning her grand entrance for maximum sympathy." The comparison to my childhood revealed another layer of their systematic cruelty. They had always dismissed legitimate concerns and genuine distress as attention-seeking behavior, training me from an early age to doubt my own perceptions and needs. Now they were applying the same toxic pattern to Emma with potentially deadly consequences. "The search teams need more specific information," I pressed. "Exactly where did you stop the car? Which direction did you tell Emma to walk? Are there any landmarks you remember?" Harold finally looked up from his fishing reel. "I already told you everything relevant. We drove up the old mining trail, stopped at that elephant-shaped boulder formation, and pointed Emma toward the main campground. If she followed basic directions and used common sense, she would have been back hours ago." But as I pressed for more details, inconsistencies began emerging in their story. Susan mentioned that they had actually taken a detour to avoid other campers. while Patricia recalled that Harold had stopped twice to check his GPS because the trail looked different than he remembered. Harold himself admitted that he might have taken a newer route that wasn't marked on his old maps. "The exact location doesn't really matter," Harold said dismissively. "The principle is what's important. Emma needed to learn self-reliance and respect for authority. If she had followed instructions and maintained a proper attitude, she would be safely back here enjoying dinner with her family." Their continued refusal to take responsibility was maddening, but what happened next revealed the true depth of their calculated indifference. My phone rang with an incoming call from an unknown local number. When I answered, a woman's voice identified herself as Nancy from the Mojave Desert Search and Rescue Foundation. "Mrs. Johnson, we've been monitoring radio communications about the search for your daughter," Nancy said. "I'm calling because we received a very concerning phone call about an hour ago from someone claiming to represent your family. The caller said that the search had been called off because your daughter had returned safely, and they requested that all volunteer teams stand down." My blood turned to ice. No one from my family would have made that call. Emma is still missing, and we need every available resource to find her. "That's what we suspected," Nancy replied grimly. The caller refused to provide proper identification or coordinate with official park services. It seemed like someone was trying to interfere with rescue operations, so we ignored the request and continued our search efforts. I turned to stare at my family with new understanding. Not only had they abandoned Emma in the desert and refused to help search for her, they had actively attempted to sabotage rescue efforts by convincing volunteer teams to abandon the search. "Did any of you call search and rescue organizations to tell them Emma had been found?" I demanded. Patricia's momentary pause before answering told me everything I needed to know. "Well, we thought it might be wise to prevent unnecessary resource allocation if Emma was likely to return on her own," she said carefully. "Search and rescue operations are expensive and disruptive. If Emma was just hiding somewhere waiting for attention, we didn't want to waste taxpayer money on an elaborate production." Susan nodded approvingly. "Mom was just being considerate of other people who might need legitimate emergency services. Emma's little adventure shouldn't take resources away from real emergencies." Their attempt to sabotage the search revealed a level of malicious calculation that took my breath away. They weren't just passively refusing to help find Emma. They were actively working to ensure she remained lost long enough to suffer maximum psychological damage from her ordeal. But the most shocking revelation was still to come. As I was preparing to return to the search teams with information about the sabotage attempt, I overheard Patricia making another phone call. This time, she wasn't trying to stop the search. She was calling her church group to begin spreading her version of events. "Yes, it's just heartbreaking," Patricia was saying in a voice dripping with false concern. "Emma has been struggling with behavioral issues for months, and today she ran away from our family camping trip. Poor Vicky is beside herself with worry, but honestly, we've all seen this coming. Emma has been increasingly defiant and disrespectful, especially toward authority figures." Patricia paused to listen, then continued her performance. "Oh, we're doing everything we can to help, of course. But you know how teenagers can be when they don't get their way. Emma probably expected us to chase after her immediately, and when we didn't play her game, she decided to escalate the situation for maximum drama. We're just praying that she comes to her senses before something terrible happens." The call continued for several minutes, with Patricia carefully constructing a narrative that portrayed Emma as a troubled runaway, and my family as concerned relatives trying to help a difficult teenager. She was already building public support for her version of events, creating a foundation of sympathy that would protect her from accountability if Emma was seriously injured or killed. As I listened to Patricia's calculated manipulation of people who trusted her, I realized that my family's planning went far beyond the camping trip itself. They had prepared comprehensive damage control strategies to manage public perception, legal consequences, and family relationships long before they ever drove Emma into the desert. But they had made one critical miscalculation. They had assumed that I would be too devastated and panicked to think clearly about their behavior. They expected me to focus entirely on finding Emma while they managed the narrative and minimized their responsibility. Instead, I was documenting everything, every conversation, every text message, every phone call, because while they were busy covering their tracks, I was building a case that would ensure they faced consequences for what they had done to my daughter. And somewhere in the darkness ahead, Emma was still fighting for her life, unaware that the people who claimed to love her were more concerned about protecting their reputations than ensuring her survival. The helicopter searchlight continued its methodical sweep across the desert landscape, and I made a silent promise to my daughter. No matter what it took, no matter what I had to do, I would make sure that justice was served for what my family had put her through. But first we had to find her alive. The search dogs arrived at dawn, their handlers bringing decades of experience, tracking missing persons in desert conditions. As the canine teams began working Emma's scent trail from the last confirmed location I hadn't slept in over 20 hours, but adrenaline and maternal terror kept me functioning on pure determination. The dogs have picked up a strong scent trail leading northeast, reported handler Martinez, a weathered woman whose German Shepherd had found over 40 missing persons during her career. Your daughter was definitely in this area, and she was moving with purpose rather than wandering randomly. That's encouraging. But the direction Emma had traveled filled me with new dread. The topographical maps showed that northeast led directly toward the old copper mining district, an area riddled with unmarked shafts and unstable underground chambers that had been abandoned since the 1920s. Modern safety regulations prohibited recreational access to most of the mining area, but the remote location made enforcement nearly impossible. Ranger Torres spread out geological survey maps that revealed the full scope of the danger Emma might have encountered. Red circles marked documented mine shafts, but dotted lines indicated areas where additional excavations were suspected but not confirmed. The underground network beneath that section of desert resembled a honeycomb of potential death traps. Heat exhaustion can cause people to seek underground shelter instinctively, Torres explained. If your daughter found one of these mine entrances, she might have gone inside looking for cooler temperatures without realizing the structural risks. The temperature had dropped to a relatively comfortable 85 degrees during the night, but weather forecasts predicted another day of triple-digit heat, beginning within hours. If Emma had found temporary shelter, she might survive the night, but continued exposure without water would become critical by mid-afternoon. My phone buzzed with yet another message from my family, this one from Harold. "Coffee's ready if you want to take a break from your search party theatrics. Emma will come back when she gets tired of playing hide and seek. Kids her age love attention and drama." The casual dismissal of Emma's mortal peril while she potentially lay unconscious in a mine shaft made me want to scream, but I forced myself to focus on providing useful information to the search teams. Every minute wasted on anger was a minute stolen from Emma's chances of survival. That's when Susan made the comment that revealed just how little remorse any of them felt for their actions. I had returned to their campsite to check if Emma had somehow made contact and found Susan preparing an elaborate breakfast spread on their portable table. Bacon, eggs, pancakes, fresh fruit, and gourmet coffee created a feast that mocked the gravity of the situation. "You know, Vicky, this whole experience has been quite educational," Susan said while flipping pancakes on their camp stove. "Emma needed to learn that her attitude has real-world consequences, and you needed to remember that your overprotective parenting style isn't helping anyone. Sometimes the best lessons come through natural consequences." Patricia nodded approvingly while buttering toast. "We've been too enabling over the years. Emma has been coddled and protected from every minor discomfort, which is why she never developed proper resilience or respect for authority. This camping adventure might be the best thing that ever happened to her character development." Harold was reading a newspaper as if this were an ordinary family vacation. "My grandfather left me in the woods for 3 days when I was Emma's age, after I showed disrespect to my elders. I found my way home, learned valuable life skills, and never talked back to authority figures again. Emma will emerge from this experience stronger and wiser. But what if she doesn't emerge at all? I asked, my voice breaking. What if she's lying unconscious in a mine shaft right now, dying of dehydration, while you eat pancakes and discuss character building? Susan paused in her cooking and gave me a look of patient condescension. Vicky, your catastrophic thinking isn't helping anyone. Emma is a smart, resourceful girl who knows how to take care of herself when she stops expecting other people to solve all her problems. The best thing you can do right now is have faith in her abilities and stop projecting your own anxieties onto this situation. The psychological manipulation was breathtaking. They had managed to frame my desperate concern for Emma's survival as neurotic overprotectiveness while positioning their child endangerment as wise parenting guidance. Even in the face of potential tragedy, they maintained their narrative of moral superiority. But then Patricia made an admission that revealed something even more disturbing than their lack of remorse. Besides, she said while sipping her gourmet coffee, Emma has been getting too comfortable questioning our family values lately. She needs to remember that challenging established authority leads to unpleasant consequences. If she spends enough time thinking about her behavior in an uncomfortable environment, she might finally understand the importance of gratitude and respect. The words hung in the desert air like a confession of intentional cruelty. This wasn't about teaching Emma responsibility or survival skills. This was about breaking her spirit through calculated suffering designed to terrorize her into permanent submission to their authority. But the most shocking revelation was still to come. While my family continued their leisurely breakfast, my phone rang with an update from the search coordinator. The helicopter had spotted something significant near one of the mine entrances, and ground teams were moving in to investigate. "We found clothing fibers caught on vegetation near the Martinez mine entrance," Torres reported over the radio. "The fabric appears consistent with the yellow shirt you described your daughter wearing. We're proceeding with extreme caution due to structural instability in the area." My heart pounded as I imagined Emma trapped underground in darkness and heat that could be even more dangerous than the surface conditions. Mine shafts were notorious for sudden collapses, toxic gas accumulation, and disorienting tunnel networks that could confuse even experienced spelunkers. But when I shared this development with my family expecting some flicker of concern or remorse, their reactions revealed the true depth of their malicious intent. "Well, I suppose that's what happens when people don't follow simple directions," Harold said without looking up from his newspaper. Emma was told to stay on marked trails and walk directly back to camp. If she chose to go exploring in dangerous areas instead, that's a decision she'll have to live with. Susan actually smiled as she served herself another pancake. "Maybe some time in a dark, uncomfortable place will help Emma appreciate the comfortable life she's been taking for granted. Sometimes dramatic lessons are the most effective ones." Patricia's response was the most chilling of all. If Emma is down in one of those mines, she's probably finally experiencing some genuine consequences for her behavior. No cell phone, no air conditioning, no one rushing to rescue her every time she faces a challenge. This might be exactly the reality check she needed. They were discussing the possibility of Emma being trapped in a potentially fatal situation with satisfaction rather than horror. Their plan hadn't gone wrong or escalated beyond their intentions. This level of danger and terror was exactly what they had hoped to achieve. But their most revealing comment came when Harold made what he thought was a helpful suggestion. "You know, Vicky, if Emma has gotten herself into serious trouble, you might want to consider how you're going to explain this to social services," he said thoughtfully. "After all, you were responsible for supervising your daughter during this camping trip. If something unfortunate happens because of inadequate parental oversight, there could be legal implications for your fitness as a mother." The threat was subtle, but unmistakable. Even if Emma survived this ordeal, my family was prepared to use her suffering as evidence against me in custody battles or legal proceedings. They had created a situation where Emma could die, and if she survived, They planned to use her trauma as ammunition to gain control over both of us. But just then the radio crackled with the news I had been praying to hear for over 15 hours. "Ground team to base camp," came the excited voice of the rescue coordinator. "We've found her. The subject is alive and conscious, requesting immediate medical evacuation to the mine entrance for extraction procedures." Emma was alive, hurt, traumatized, and trapped underground, but alive. And as I raced toward the rescue site, leaving my family behind with their cold pancakes and calculated cruelty, I made a silent promise to my daughter. She would never have to face their manipulation and abuse again. Whatever it took, however far I had to go, I would make sure that the people who had done this to her faced consequences that matched the magnitude of their crimes. But first I needed to hold my daughter and tell her that she was safe, that she was loved, and that no one would ever abandon her in the darkness again. The mine entrance was a jagged opening in the rock face, partially concealed by decades of desert vegetation and loose stone. As the rescue team prepared their equipment, I could hear Emma's voice echoing from somewhere deep underground, weak but unmistakably alive. The sound of my daughter calling for help from that dark hole in the earth was the most beautiful and terrifying thing I had ever experienced. "Emma, honey, I'm here," I called down into the shaft. "The rescue team is going to get you out safely. You're going to be okay." Her response came back distorted by the rocky walls, but filled with desperate relief. Mom, is that really you? I thought I was going to die down here. I can't climb out. The walls are too slippery, and I think I hurt my ankle when I fell." Rescue Specialist Davis, a compact man with decades of underground recovery experience, was already rigging rappelling equipment while explaining the extraction process to his team. "The good news is that she's conscious and communicating clearly. The shaft appears to be approximately 30 feet deep with a relatively stable floor. The challenging aspect will be the extraction angle and potential for rockfall during the ascent." As Davis descended into the mine shaft, his voice provided a running commentary on Emma's condition. "She's alert and responsive, visible dehydration symptoms, but no obvious signs of serious injury. She's taken shelter in an alcove that provided protection from direct sun exposure. Very smart survival instincts for someone her age." The wait while Davis assessed Emma's condition felt endless, but when his voice emerged from the shaft again, the relief in his tone was unmistakable. "She's stable for transport. Mild heat exhaustion, possible sprained ankle, and psychological trauma, but nothing immediately life-threatening. We're going to harness her for extraction now." It took 45 minutes to safely bring Emma to the surface, and when she finally emerged into the morning sunlight, the sight of my daughter nearly broke my heart. She was covered in dust and dried tear tracks, her hair matted with sweat and debris. Her lips were cracked from dehydration, her yellow shirt torn from scrambling over rocks, and her eyes held a haunted quality that no 16-year-old should ever have to develop. But she was alive, and she was safe, and when she collapsed into my arms, I felt like I could breathe properly for the first time in 18 hours. "Mom, I was so scared," Emma whispered against my shoulder. "I kept thinking I was going to die down there, and you would never know what really happened. They said it was just supposed to be a lesson about respecting family, but they left me with nothing. No water, no phone, no way to get help." The paramedics immediately began treating Emma's dehydration with IV fluids, while checking her vital signs and examining her injured ankle. As they worked, Emma began describing her ordeal in fragments, her voice growing stronger as the fluids helped restore her clarity. "I tried to follow their directions back to camp, but everything looked the same," she said while the paramedic cleaned cuts on her hands. "I walked for hours, but I kept ending up in places that didn't look familiar. The sun was so hot I felt like I was cooking from the inside out." Emma explained that she had been searching for higher ground to get cell phone reception when she discovered the mine entrance. The opening had felt significantly cooler than the surface temperature, and in her heat-exhausted state, the underground shelter had seemed like a reasonable place to wait for rescue. "I kept thinking someone would come looking for me," Emma continued. I thought Grandpa Harold would feel bad about leaving me out there and come back to get me. I never imagined they would just sit in their air-conditioned RV while I was dying. But then Emma said something that made my blood run cold with new understanding of what my family had put her through. "Mom, right before my phone died, I heard voices above me on the ridge," Emma said quietly. "I was screaming for help, but when they got closer, I realized it was Grandpa Harold and Aunt Susan. They weren't looking for me to rescue me. They were checking to see if I was still alive." The rescue team members exchanged glances as Emma continued her account. "I heard Aunt Susan say that if I was unconscious or seriously hurt, they would call for help and claim they had been searching for hours. But if I was still conscious and able to walk, they were going to leave me out there longer because the lesson wasn't finished yet." My hands shook as Emma described overhearing Harold's response. The girl needs to learn that actions have consequences. If she's still got enough energy to yell for help, she hasn't suffered enough to change her attitude. Emma had hidden in the mine shaft not to escape the heat, but to avoid being discovered by the very people who should have been her rescuers. She had been so terrified of what additional punishment they might inflict that underground darkness had seemed safer than facing them again. "I started recording on my phone before the battery died," Emma said weakly. "I wanted to leave some record of what really happened if I didn't make it out alive. The audio might still be there if the phone survived." When the paramedics retrieved Emma's phone from her pocket, the screen was cracked and the device appeared dead, but they carefully sealed it in an evidence bag for potential data recovery. If Emma's recording had survived, it could provide crucial evidence of my family's true intentions during her abandonment. As the ambulance prepared to transport Emma to the hospital, she grabbed my hand with surprising strength for someone who had been near death hours earlier. "Mom promised me we never have to see them again," Emma said urgently. "Promise me they can't hurt us anymore. I don't care if they're family. I don't care what other people think. They tried to kill me to prove a point about respect and authority." The raw terror in my daughter's voice as she begged for protection from her own grandparents and aunt crystallized something inside me that had been building throughout this nightmare. My family hadn't just committed child abuse or reckless endangerment. They had attempted to break Emma's spirit through calculated torture, and they had been prepared to let her die rather than admit their methods were wrong. "I promise," I told Emma as the ambulance doors closed. "They will never hurt you again, and they're going to face consequences for what they did to you." As we drove toward the hospital, Emma fell asleep holding my hand, her body finally surrendering to exhaustion now that she was safe. But even in sleep, she flinched whenever the ambulance hit bumps or made sudden movements, her subconscious mind still expecting danger and abandonment. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. "Glad to hear Emma turned up safe and sound. When you're done with this medical drama, we should discuss appropriate consequences for her behavior. Running away and causing all this trouble requires serious discipline." The text revealed that even after everything that had happened, my family still believed Emma was the one who needed to be punished. They viewed her survival as an inconvenience that interfered with their educational objectives, not a miraculous outcome that exposed the cruelty of their methods. But they had made one final mistake that would prove to be their undoing. While Emma had been fighting for her life underground, they had continued documenting their thoughts and plans in text messages and phone calls, creating an electronic trail of evidence that would demonstrate their malicious intent beyond any reasonable doubt. As the hospital came into view, I knew that Emma's rescue was just the beginning of this story. The real fight was about to begin, and this time I would be the one setting the terms of engagement. At Desert Regional Medical Center, Emma underwent comprehensive treatment for severe dehydration, heat exhaustion, and psychological trauma. While doctors worked to restore her electrolyte balance and treat her injuries, the crime scene investigators arrived to examine her phone and document the physical evidence of her ordeal. Detective Sarah Martinez from the Riverside County Sheriff's Department had specialized in child endangerment cases for over 15 years, and her expression grew increasingly grim as she reviewed the preliminary evidence from Emma's rescue. The medical team confirms that your daughter was approximately 2 hours away from kidney failure when she was found, Detective Martinez explained while taking my statement. The combination of extreme heat exposure, dehydration, and psychological stress could have been fatal if the rescue had been delayed much longer. Emma's phone had survived its underground ordeal better than anyone had expected. The crime scene technicians were able to extract not only the audio recording Emma had mentioned, but also text messages, location data, and even partial video footage that documented her desperate attempts to find help. The audio recording was devastating. Emma's frightened voice described her growing disorientation and physical distress as the hours passed, but more importantly, it captured clear conversations between Harold and Susan during their visit to check on her condition. Harold's voice was unmistakable. "She's still conscious and moving around down there. The lesson isn't complete if she hasn't really suffered for her disrespect. Let's give her another few hours to think about her attitude." Susan's response was equally damning. "If she dies down there, we'll say she wandered off because she was being rebellious. Everyone knows teenagers make stupid decisions, but if she lives through this, she'll never challenge our authority again." The recording continued with their discussion about how long to wait before discovering Emma's location, how to coordinate their stories with Patricia, and what disciplinary measures they would implement when Emma was eventually rescued. But the most shocking portion of the audio captured Harold making a chilling calculation about acceptable casualties in their educational campaign. "Look, Susan, if something bad happens to Emma, it's unfortunate, but not our fault," Harold's voice said clearly. "We gave her simple instructions to follow. If she chose to ignore those instructions and get herself into trouble, that's a consequence of her own poor decision-making. We can't be held responsible for every stupid choice a teenager makes." Detective Martinez paused the playback and looked at me with professional sympathy mixed with personal outrage. "This recording provides clear evidence of willful endangerment with depraved indifference to human life. Your family members can be heard discussing scenarios where your daughter might die, and their primary concern was avoiding legal responsibility rather than ensuring her safety." But the evidence went far deeper than the audio recording. Emma's phone had automatically uploaded location data to her cloud storage account throughout her ordeal, creating a minute-by-minute timeline of her desperate search for help and eventual decision to shelter in the mine shaft. The location data revealed that Emma had actually been walking in the correct direction for the first 3 hours after being abandoned. She had followed Harold's instructions, precisely staying on marked trails and heading toward the main campground exactly as directed. But the simple directions Harold had given her were wrong. Your daughter's GPS track shows that she was abandoned approximately 8 miles from your family's campsite, not 5 miles, as they claimed, Detective Martinez explained while studying the digital maps. The trail markers in that area had been damaged by flash floods last spring, and several paths that appear to lead toward the campground actually circle back toward the mining district. Emma had become lost not because she ignored instructions or made poor decisions, but because Harold had given her incorrect information while claiming expertise he didn't actually possess. His casual dismissal of her navigation difficulties as teenage rebellion was particularly cruel, given that he had set her up for failure through his own incompetence. The text messages recovered from Emma's phone painted an even more disturbing picture of the psychological abuse she had endured during what was supposed to be a family bonding experience. Messages between Emma and her best friend revealed that Patricia, Harold, and Susan had been systematically undermining Emma's confidence and self-worth throughout the camping trip. Emma had texted her friend Casey the morning before being abandoned. "They've been making comments about my weight, my grades, my clothes, everything. Grandma Patricia keeps saying I'm getting fat like Mom and that boys won't like me if I don't learn self-discipline. Aunt Susan said I'm too stupid for college and should learn practical skills like housework instead." The messages continued. "Grandpa Harold told me that Mom doesn't really love me and only keeps me around for the child support money from Dad's life insurance. He said if I was a better daughter, Mom wouldn't have to work so hard and could find a husband who would take care of both of us properly. Reading Emma's desperate attempts to process their emotional manipulation was heartbreaking, but it also provided crucial evidence of the systematic psychological abuse that had preceded the physical endangerment. But the most damning evidence emerged when Detective Martinez obtained search warrants for my family's electronic devices and social media accounts. Patricia's Facebook messages revealed a coordinated campaign to undermine my relationship with Emma while building support for their intervention tactics. She had spent weeks posting carefully crafted complaints about Emma's behavior to her church group, neighborhood associations, and extended family members. Praying for wisdom in dealing with my troubled granddaughter read one typical post. Emma has become increasingly disrespectful and defiant, especially toward authority figures. Her poor mother is at her wit's end. Sometimes loving discipline requires difficult decisions. The posts had generated dozens of supportive responses from people who trusted Patricia's version of events, creating a network of character witnesses who would testify to Emma's supposed behavioral problems without knowing they were being manipulated into supporting child abuse. Susan's social media activity was even more revealing. Her Instagram account contained photos from the camping trip showing my family's luxury accommodations, gourmet meals, and recreational activities, all posted with captions about family bonding and teaching life lessons, while Emma was dying of thirst in the desert. One particularly nauseating post showed Susan and Patricia enjoying cocktails at sunset with the caption, "Sometimes tough love means letting kids learn from natural consequences. Emma is discovering the value of respect and gratitude during her solo camping adventure. Character building isn't always comfortable, but it's necessary for proper development." The post had been uploaded approximately 6 hours after Emma was abandoned, when they knew she was in serious danger, but chose to celebrate their successful implementation of psychological torture instead of ensuring her safety. But Harold's digital trail provided the most shocking evidence of their premeditated intent to cause harm. His browser history revealed extensive research into survival times for heat exposure, legal definitions of child abandonment versus legitimate punishment, and even searches for plausible deniability child discipline, and how long can teenagers survive without water in desert conditions. Harold had spent weeks researching exactly how much suffering Emma could endure before permanent damage or death became likely. This wasn't impulsive discipline or poor judgment. This was calculated torture, calibrated to inflict maximum psychological trauma while maintaining legal defensibility. Detective Martinez closed her case folder and looked at me with the expression of someone who had seen too much human cruelty during her career. "Mrs. Johnson, I want you to understand that this is one of the most clear-cut cases of child endangerment I've encountered," she said solemnly. "The evidence shows systematic planning, willful infliction of suffering, and depraved indifference to your daughter's life. We're not talking about overly strict discipline or poor judgment. We're talking about felony charges that could result in significant prison time." As Emma slept peacefully in her hospital bed, finally safe and receiving proper care, I realized that my family's attempt to break her spirit had backfired spectacularly. Instead of creating a traumatized, submissive child who would never challenge their authority again, they had created an ironclad legal case that would ensure they face serious consequences for their crimes. But more importantly, they had revealed their true nature so completely that I would never again question my decision to protect Emma from their influence. The evidence didn't just prove their guilt in court. It proved that cutting them out of our lives permanently wasn't just necessary for our safety, it was an act of love and protection that Emma deserved. 3 days after Emma's rescue, Detective Martinez arrived at the hospital with arrest warrants for Patricia, Harold, and Susan. The charges were more serious than I had dared to hope: felony child endangerment, reckless endangerment with great bodily harm, conspiracy to commit child abuse, and making false reports to emergency services. The district attorney reviewed all the evidence and determined that your family's actions met the legal threshold for aggravated child endangerment. Detective Martinez explained as Emma signed her victim statement. The premeditation, the extreme risk to life, and the attempts to interfere with rescue operations elevate this beyond simple poor judgment. Child Protective Services had also launched their own investigation interviewing Emma, reviewing medical records, and examining the extensive digital evidence of my family's planning and execution of their desert abandonment scheme. The CPS report would be crucial for any future custody or visitation decisions, but their preliminary findings were unambiguous. The perpetrators demonstrated calculated intent to inflict suffering on the minor child for the purpose of psychological manipulation and control. Read the official CPS summary. The level of planning, the extreme nature of the endangerment, and the complete lack of remorse indicate a pattern of abuse that poses ongoing risk to the child's physical and emotional safety. Emma had been discharged from the hospital but remained under medical supervision for lingering effects of her heat exposure and dehydration. Her physical recovery was progressing well, but the psychological trauma would require months of specialized therapy to address properly. The arrests themselves provided their own revelations about my family's character and priorities. When Detective Martinez and her team arrived at the campground to execute the warrants, they found Patricia, Harold, and Susan exactly where I had left them 3 days earlier, still enjoying their luxury camping vacation, as if nothing significant had happened. They had made no attempts to check on Emma's condition, offer support during her recovery, or express any remorse for their actions. Patricia's first response to being informed of the charges was telling, "This is absolutely ridiculous. We were trying to help that girl develop some character and self-reliance. If she had followed simple instructions and maintained a proper attitude, none of this would have happened." Harold attempted to assert his authority even while being handcuffed. "Emma needed to learn respect for her elders and appreciation for what she has. My generation understood that children require firm discipline to develop into responsible adults. You can't coddle kids and expect them to become strong people." But Susan's reaction revealed the depth of their delusional thinking about accountability and consequences. "This is persecution of traditional family values," Susan declared as Detective Martinez read her rights. "We were practicing legitimate parental authority that has been used for generations to shape children's behavior. If modern society wants to criminalize proper discipline, that's a problem with society, not with our methods." Even facing serious felony charges, they maintained their narrative of moral superiority and victimization. They genuinely believed that their right to control and punish Emma superseded her right to safety medical care and basic human dignity. But their delusions were about to collide with legal reality. During the booking process, Patricia made statements that became additional evidence against her. When asked to explain her actions, she provided a detailed confession that revealed even more disturbing aspects of their planning. "Emma has been getting too independent and disrespectful lately," Patricia told the arresting officers. "She questioned my advice about her appearance, argued with Harold about politics, and even suggested that we were being unfair to her mother. Someone needed to teach her that challenging authority figures leads to unpleasant consequences." Patricia's statement confirmed that Emma's abandonment was specifically designed to punish her for defending me against their emotional abuse. This wasn't about Emma's behavior toward them. This was about breaking her spirit for having the courage to recognize and resist their manipulation tactics. Harold's booking statement was equally damaging. "I've been camping and hiking in that desert for 40 years. I knew exactly how challenging those conditions would be for someone Emma's age. The whole point was to put her in a situation where she would have to rely on our guidance and protection to survive. If she had learned proper humility and gratitude, we would have retrieved her before any real harm occurred." The admission that they had deliberately calculated the level of danger Emma would face and had planned to use her terror and desperation as leverage to control her behavior demonstrated the sophisticated cruelty underlying their actions. Susan's statement was the most revealing of all. "We researched the legal boundaries of parental discipline to make sure we stayed within acceptable limits. We knew that if we framed this as a character-building exercise rather than punishment, we could justify almost any level of discomfort or fear as educational rather than abusive. She had essentially confessed to researching how to torture a child while maintaining legal deniability, treating Emma's suffering as an academic exercise in psychological manipulation rather than recognizing her fundamental humanity and right to safety. But their most shocking statements came during the arraignment hearing, where they had the opportunity to express remorse, take responsibility, or demonstrate understanding of the severity of their actions. Instead, they doubled down on their justifications. Patricia addressed the judge directly. "Your Honor, I have raised 4 children and helped raise 12 grandchildren over the past 50 years. Emma needed strong guidance to correct her increasingly defiant behavior, and sometimes effective parenting requires difficult decisions that may seem harsh to outside observers." Harold's statement to the court was even more disturbing. Emma knew the rules and chose to violate them. Natural consequences are the most effective teachers, and if she had died because of her own poor decisions, that would have been a tragic but educational outcome for other children who might consider similar disrespectful behavior. Susan's courtroom statement revealed the ultimate goal of their abuse. "We wanted Emma to understand that her comfortable life depended on maintaining proper relationships with family authority figures. If she learned to appreciate what she had and respect the people who provided for her, she could avoid future unpleasant experiences." They were describing a protection racket where Emma's safety and well-being were contingent on her absolute submission to their control. They had attempted to teach her that love was conditional, that security could be revoked at any time, and that questioning their authority would result in abandonment and potential death. The judge's response to their statements made clear that their strategy of claiming moral authority had backfired completely. The defendants' complete lack of remorse and continued justification of actions that nearly resulted in the death of a minor child demonstrate an ongoing threat to public safety. Judge Williams declared, "These are not parents or grandparents who made errors in judgment while attempting to provide proper discipline. These are adults who systematically planned and executed a scheme designed to terrorize a child into submission through the deliberate infliction of life-threatening conditions." Bail was set at $50,000 each, with additional conditions prohibiting any contact with Emma or attempts to influence witnesses. But more importantly, the judge ordered immediate psychiatric evaluations to determine whether my family members were capable of understanding the difference between appropriate discipline and criminal abuse. As I watched them being led away in handcuffs, still protesting their innocence and moral superiority, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, the absence of guilt about standing up to their manipulation and control. For the first time in my adult life, I was watching my family face real consequences for their behavior, and I wasn't being blamed for their suffering or expected to rescue them from the results of their own choices. Emma squeezed my hand as we left the courthouse. "Mom, are they really going to jail for what they did to me?" "Yes, honey," I replied, "and they're going to stay there until they understand that hurting people has consequences, even when those people are family." The phone calls from jail began within hours of my family's arrest, but instead of apologies or expressions of concern for Emma's welfare, they were demands for bail money and accusations that I was betraying my own family for temporary sympathy and attention. Patricia called first, speaking in the clipped, imperious tone she had perfected over decades of expecting immediate compliance with her wishes. "Vicky, this nonsense has gone far enough," Patricia declared without any greeting or acknowledgement of what had happened to Emma. "You need to drop these ridiculous charges immediately and post our bail. We are your family, and family protects each other from outside interference, not throws each other to the wolves for political correctness." The conversation revealed that even facing serious felony charges, Patricia maintained her delusion that she was the victim of Emma's overreaction and my betrayal of family loyalty. She expressed no concern for Emma's physical or emotional recovery, no regret for the terror and suffering they had inflicted, and no understanding that their actions constituted crimes rather than legitimate parenting decisions. Emma has always been prone to drama and exaggeration, Patricia continued. She's probably enjoying all this attention and sympathy she's getting from playing the victim. You know how teenagers manipulate situations to avoid taking responsibility for their own behavior. If you encourage this victim mentality, you're just enabling her to become a weak, entitled adult who blames other people for her problems. The psychological manipulation was breathtaking in its audacity. Patricia was attempting to gaslight me into believing that Emma's near-death experience was a performance designed to avoid accountability for imaginary behavioral problems. She wanted me to prioritize protecting her reputation over ensuring Emma's safety and recovery. Harold's call was even more revealing about their fundamental inability to comprehend the gravity of their actions. "Vicky, you're making a serious mistake that will destroy this family permanently," Harold said in his authoritative voice that had intimidated me throughout my childhood. Emma needed strong guidance to correct her attitude problems, and what we did was well within the bounds of legitimate parental authority. If you let these liberal prosecutors criminalize traditional discipline methods, you're setting a precedent that will make it impossible to raise respectful, responsible children. Harold's framing of child endangerment as a political issue rather than a criminal act demonstrated his complete disconnection from reality and accountability. He genuinely believed that his right to terrorize Emma superseded her right to live, and that any legal consequences he faced were persecution rather than justice. Besides, Harold continued, Emma learned valuable lessons about self-reliance and appreciation that she never would have learned in a comfortable, protected environment. Character building requires challenge and discomfort. If she had died out there, it would have been because she made poor survival decisions, not because we failed to provide adequate guidance. The casual discussion of Emma's potential death as an acceptable outcome for their educational objectives was chilling, but it also provided prosecutors with additional evidence of their depraved indifference to human life. Susan's call was the most psychologically sophisticated in its manipulation tactics, attempting to exploit my emotions and relationships rather than simply demanding compliance. "Vicky, I understand you're angry and scared right now," Susan began in a tone of false sympathy. Emma's situation was much more dramatic than we anticipated, and I can see how that would be traumatic for both of you. But you have to understand that we were trying to help Emma become a stronger, more resilient person. Susan's approach was more dangerous than Patricia's imperious demands or Harold's authoritarian pronouncements because it acknowledged my emotional state while simultaneously minimizing the severity of their actions. She was attempting to make me feel understood while manipulating me into accepting their narrative. The real problem here is that Emma has never faced genuine adversity or consequences for her behavior, Susan continued. She's been protected and coddled to the point where she doesn't understand how to handle discomfort or challenge. We wanted to give her an opportunity to develop real strength and self-confidence by overcoming a difficult situation through her own resources. The reframing of criminal endangerment as character development was particularly insidious because it contained enough psychological truth to sound plausible to someone who hadn't witnessed the cold calculation behind their planning. But then Susan made a statement that revealed the true scope of their manipulation and control. "Vicky, you have to think about Emma's future," Susan said in a tone of concerned authority. "If she goes through life believing that she's a victim who needs constant protection from challenge and discomfort, she'll never develop the resilience she needs to be successful. More importantly, if she learns that she can use dramatic accusations to destroy family relationships when she doesn't get her way, she'll become a manipulative person who hurts everyone around her." Susan was attempting to convince me that protecting Emma from their abuse would damage Emma's character and future prospects. She wanted me to believe that allowing them to continue terrorizing my daughter was actually an act of love and wisdom that would benefit Emma in the long run. The psychological sophistication of the manipulation was remarkable, but it was also completely undermined by the evidence of their premeditation and their continued refusal to acknowledge Emma's humanity or right to safety. But the most revealing conversation came when Patricia called back after being informed by their lawyer that the evidence against them was overwhelming and that plea negotiations would be necessary. "This is all your fault, Vicky," Patricia said in a voice filled with cold rage. "If you had raised Emma properly from the beginning, she never would have developed the attitude problems that required correction. If you had supported family authority instead of enabling her disrespectful behavior, none of this would have been necessary." Patricia's blame shifting revealed the core dynamic that had defined my relationship with my family for decades. I was simultaneously held responsible for every problem they created, while being denied any authority to make decisions that might prevent those problems from occurring. Emma learned her defiant attitude from watching you question family decisions and set inappropriate boundaries. Patricia continued, "You taught her that she could challenge authority figures and refuse to accept guidance from people who know better than she does. This whole situation is the result of your parenting failures, not our legitimate attempts to correct the damage you've done." The conversation continued with Patricia, detailing how my attempts to protect Emma from their emotional abuse had supposedly created the behavioral problems that justified their physical endangerment of her. In their worldview, my refusal to allow them unlimited access to manipulate and control Emma was the real crime, while their systematic psychological torture was justified intervention. But Patricia's final statement revealed the ultimate goal of all their manipulation: total control over both Emma and me through the systematic destruction of Emma's trust in my love and protection. "Emma needs to understand that you can't protect her from the real world forever," Patricia said with satisfaction. "Eventually, she'll realize that family loyalty and respect for authority are more important than temporary comfort and false security. When that happens, she'll come back to us for real guidance, and you'll be left alone with the consequences of your selfish decisions." They hadn't just attempted to terrorize Emma into submission. They had tried to destroy her faith in my ability and willingness to protect her, hoping to create a situation where she would turn to them for safety, after learning that challenging their authority led to abandonment and potential death. But their plan had backfired completely. Instead of breaking Emma's spirit or undermining her trust in me, their cruelty had revealed their true nature so clearly that Emma now understood the difference between genuine love and manipulative control. As I hung up on Patricia's final demand for bail money and family loyalty, Emma looked up from her homework with a question that showed how much wisdom she had gained from surviving their attempt to destroy her spirit. "Mom, why do they think hurting me was supposed to make me love them more?" The question was so perceptive and heartbreaking that it took me a moment to find words. "Honey, some people confuse control with love and fear with respect. They thought that if they could make you scared enough of losing their protection, you would stop questioning whether their treatment of you was actually loving." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "But real love doesn't threaten to abandon you for asking questions or standing up for yourself, does it?" "No, sweetheart," I replied. "Real love protects you, supports your growth, and celebrates your strength. Real love never tries to break your spirit to prove its power over you." As Emma returned to her homework with a peaceful expression I hadn't seen in months, I realized that my family's cruelest attack on her had ultimately become the greatest gift they could have given us, both absolute clarity about the difference between genuine family and toxic manipulation disguised as tradition. 6 weeks after her rescue, Emma made a decision that surprised everyone, including the prosecutor handling our case. She requested a meeting with Detective Martinez to provide additional testimony about years of psychological abuse that preceded the desert abandonment abuse I hadn't fully recognized because I had been so conditioned to accept my family's treatment as normal. "Mrs. Johnson, your daughter has shown remarkable courage in coming forward with this information," Detective Martinez explained as we sat in the victim advocacy office at the courthouse. The pattern of abuse she's describing significantly strengthens the case against your family members and may result in additional charges. Emma's supplementary statement revealed the systematic campaign of psychological manipulation my family had waged against her throughout her childhood, a campaign designed to undermine her self-worth and independence while positioning themselves as her only source of security and guidance. Grandma Patricia used to pull me aside during family gatherings and tell me that my mom didn't really love me, Emma said in a steady voice that belied her 16 years. She said that Mom only kept me around because of the child support money from Dad's life insurance, and that if that money ever stopped, Mom would probably give me up for adoption. The revelation that Patricia had been systematically poisoning Emma's relationship with me for years explained so many behavioral changes I had attributed to normal teenage development. Emma's occasional withdrawal, her questions about whether I really wanted her, around her tendency to be overly grateful for basic parenting decisions, all of it made sense in the context of Patricia's psychological sabotage. She also told me that I was getting fat and ugly like my mother, Emma continued, and that boys would never like me if I didn't learn self-control and proper behavior. She said that successful women knew how to stay thin and quiet, and that loud, heavy women like Mom ended up alone and bitter. My heart broke as Emma described the body image issues Patricia had deliberately cultivated the eating disorder that had been developing under my own roof, while Patricia presented herself as a concerned grandmother, trying to help Emma develop healthy habits. Grandpa Harold was different but just as mean, Emma said. He used to quiz me about politics and then tell me I was too stupid for college when I didn't know the answers he wanted. He said girls like me were better off learning practical skills like cooking and cleaning because we didn't have the intelligence for real careers. Emma's academic confidence had been another casualty of their systematic abuse. Her recent struggles with self-doubt and reluctance to participate in advanced classes now made perfect sense as symptoms of psychological manipulation rather than genuine learning difficulties. But the most disturbing revelation involved Susan's role in documenting and escalating their abuse tactics. Aunt Susan used to film me during family dinners when Grandma Patricia was criticizing my appearance or table manners, Emma explained. She said she was creating a record of my behavioral problems so that if Mom ever tried to limit their access to me, they would have evidence that I needed their guidance and correction. The videos Susan had been secretly recording weren't random documentation of family gatherings. They were carefully orchestrated evidence-gathering sessions where Patricia and Harold would deliberately provoke Emma's defensive responses. Then Susan would capture Emma's reactions while editing out their initial provocations. They had hours of footage of me looking angry, upset, or defensive. Emma said, but they never included the parts where they called me fat, stupid, or unwanted. If anyone saw those videos, it would look like I was just a moody teenager having tantrums for no reason. Detective Martinez paused the interview to contact the district attorney about expanding their investigation to include these additional recordings and the broader pattern of psychological abuse they represented. But Emma's most shocking revelation involved medical sabotage that I had never suspected. Grandma Patricia had been giving me diet pills and laxatives for over a year, Emma said quietly. She told me they were vitamins and digestive supplements, but she made me promise not to tell you because she said you would be jealous that I was getting prettier and skinnier. The weight loss I had attributed to Emma's growth spurt and increased physical activity had actually been the result of unauthorized medication that Patricia had been secretly administering. The digestive issues Emma had been experiencing, the mood swings, the fatigue, all of it was caused by drugs Patricia was giving her without medical supervision or my knowledge. She said that if I wanted to be successful and attractive, I needed to learn discipline and self-control that you couldn't teach me because you had never learned it yourself. Emma continued. She made it seem like she was giving me special advantages and opportunities that would help me have a better life than yours. The medical endangerment charges against Patricia were immediately expanded to include illegal dispensing of controlled substances to a minor and child endangerment through unauthorized medication. But more importantly, Emma's disclosure helped explain the eating disorder behaviors that had begun manifesting in the months leading up to the desert abandonment. The worst part wasn't even the pills. Emma said, her voice growing stronger as she continued her testimony. It was the way they made me feel like I had to choose between loving you and being acceptable to them. They constantly told me that loyalty meant agreeing with family elders and that questioning their decisions meant I was being disloyal to everyone. Emma described the psychological torture of being forced to participate in conversations where Patricia, Harold, and Susan criticized my parenting, my appearance, my life choices, and my worth as a person, then demanded that Emma agree with their assessments to prove her family loyalty. They would say terrible things about you, Mom, and then ask if I agreed, Emma explained. If I defended you, they said I was being disrespectful and disloyal. If I agreed with them, I felt sick and guilty for betraying you. There was no way to win. The sophisticated psychological manipulation they had employed was designed to create exactly the internal conflict. Emma described a situation where she felt forced to choose between her loyalty to me and her safety within the extended family structure. But Emma's testimony also revealed her remarkable strength and moral clarity in the face of their systematic attempts to corrupt her values and relationships. I started recording some of their conversations on my phone months ago, Emma said. I knew what they were saying was wrong, but I needed proof because they were so good at making it seem normal and justified when other people were around. Emma had been conducting her own investigation into my family's abuse, documenting their behavior and building evidence even while enduring their psychological manipulation. Her initiative and courage in gathering this evidence demonstrated exactly the kind of strength and independence my family had been trying to destroy. The additional recordings Emma had collected painted a complete picture of their coordinated campaign against both of us. Hours of audio revealed Patricia, Harold, and Susan discussing strategies for undermining my relationship with Emma, documenting supposed behavioral problems they could use against me in custody disputes, and planning increasingly severe lessons designed to break Emma's spirit. One particularly damning recording captured Patricia explaining their long-term strategy to Harold. If we can convince Emma that Vicky is inadequate and unreliable, she'll start turning to us for real guidance and support. Once we have her emotional dependency, we can mold her into the kind of respectful, obedient young woman this family needs. Harold's response revealed the financial motivation underlying their abuse. And once we have custody or guardianship, we can manage her father's life insurance money properly instead of letting Vicky waste it on unnecessary expenses like therapy and college preparation. They hadn't just been trying to control Emma for psychological satisfaction. They had been positioning themselves to gain legal and financial control over her inheritance while eliminating my influence over her life decisions. But the most revealing recording captured Susan discussing their ultimate timeline for taking complete control over Emma's future. By the time Emma turns 18, she should be completely dependent on our approval and guidance. Susan's voice explained clearly. If we've done this correctly, she'll choose to live with us during college, marry someone we approve of, and raise her children according to our values instead of the permissive nonsense Vicky believes in. They had been planning to control every major decision in Emma's adult life by systematically destroying her confidence in her own judgment and her trust in anyone outside their sphere of influence. As Detective Martinez concluded the expanded interview, Emma asked a question that demonstrated how completely she had seen through their manipulation tactics. Detective Martinez, why did they think that making me hate myself would make me love them more? The question was so perceptive that Detective Martinez paused before answering. Emma, some people confuse fear with respect and dependency with love. They thought that if they could make you feel worthless and insecure, you would be grateful for any positive attention they gave you, even if that attention came with conditions and control. Emma nodded thoughtfully. But that's not how real love works, is it? Real love doesn't require you to hate yourself or cut off other relationships. No, it doesn't, Detective Martinez confirmed. Real love builds you up, supports your independence, and celebrates your strength. What your family did to you was the opposite of love, no matter what they called it. As we left the courthouse that day, Emma walked with a confidence and clarity that had been missing for months. Testifying about their abuse hadn't re-traumatized her. It had empowered her by validating her perceptions and giving her a voice in ensuring they faced consequences for their actions. Mom, Emma said as we reached the car, "I'm glad they showed me who they really were. Now I know the difference between people who love me and people who want to own me." Her strength in the face of systematic psychological abuse filled me with pride and hope. My family's attempt to break Emma's spirit had instead revealed her remarkable resilience and moral courage. They had tried to create a broken, dependent victim, but they had inadvertently forged a strong, independent young woman who understood her worth and refused to accept abuse disguised as love. When local news outlets picked up the story of Emma's ordeal, the community response was swift and overwhelming. Within days, our story had spread beyond the Riverside County area and caught the attention of child advocacy organizations, legal reform groups, and family safety networks across Southern California. The initial news report by Channel 7 investigative reporter Amanda Chen focused on the basic facts of the case, but the community response revealed how many families had experienced similar abuse disguised as traditional discipline. The newspaper's online comments section filled with hundreds of personal stories from people who recognized patterns of manipulation and control in their own family relationships. Reading about Emma's strength in testifying against her abusers gave me the courage to finally report my own parents for the psychological abuse they inflicted during my childhood, wrote one commenter. I always thought their treatment was normal because they called it discipline and family loyalty. Local churches, schools, and community organizations began hosting information sessions about recognizing emotional abuse in family settings. The desert abandonment case had become a catalyst for broader conversations about the difference between legitimate parenting and systematic psychological manipulation. But the most powerful community response came from the search and rescue volunteers who had participated in finding Emma. They organized a press conference to share their observations about my family's behavior during the crisis, providing eyewitness testimony that corroborated the evidence from Emma's recordings and digital communications. In 30 years of search and rescue operations, I have never encountered family members who showed such complete indifference to a missing child's welfare, testified Janet Rodriguez, the experienced desert rescue specialist. While we were risking our safety to locate their granddaughter, they were sitting in air-conditioned comfort, eating gourmet meals and expressing annoyance that we were making noise with our helicopters. Ranger Miguel Torres provided even more damning testimony about their behavior during the search operation. The typical family response to a missing child involves panic, desperate cooperation, and overwhelming gratitude for any assistance, Torres explained to the gathered reporters. These family members treated the entire operation like an inconvenience that was interrupting their vacation. They actually complained that our search activities were disturbing their peace and quiet. Several other volunteers came forward with specific incidents that revealed the calculated nature of my family's indifference to Emma's suffering. When we informed the family that we had found clothing fibers near a dangerous mine shaft indicating their granddaughter might be trapped underground, the grandmother actually said, "Well, maybe that will teach her to follow directions next time," reported volunteer coordinator Mike Patterson. We were describing a potentially fatal situation, and her primary concern was whether the child had learned proper obedience. The volunteers' testimony was particularly powerful because these were experienced professionals who had worked with hundreds of families during crisis situations. Their collective assessment that my family's behavior was uniquely callous and inappropriate carried significant weight with both the media and potential jury members. But the most unexpected community support came from people who had known my family for years and finally understood the dynamics they had witnessed but never fully recognized. Patricia's church group contacted Detective Martinez with information that completely contradicted the narrative Patricia had been spreading about Emma's supposed behavioral problems. Several church members reported that Emma had always been polite, respectful, and well-behaved during religious services and community events. Patricia constantly complained about Emma's attitude and disrespectful behavior, but we never saw any evidence of the problems she described, explained church elder Margaret Sullivan. Emma was always courteous to adults, helpful with younger children, and participated actively in community service projects. We assumed Patricia was just being overly critical, but now we understand she was building false justification for abuse. Emma's school counselors and teachers provided similar testimony that contradicted Harold's claims about Emma's supposed academic deficiencies and behavioral issues. Emma is an honor student who participates actively in class discussions, helps other students with their work, and has never displayed any behavioral problems, reported her English teacher, Mr. Davis. Her grandfather's assertions about her intelligence and academic potential are completely inconsistent with her actual performance and capabilities. The testimony from Emma's school revealed another layer of my family's manipulation. They had been telling Emma she was stupid and academically hopeless while she was actually excelling in her studies. Their systematic undermining of her confidence was designed to make her dependent on their approval rather than trusting her own abilities and achievements. But perhaps the most significant community response came from Emma's pediatric medical team, who had been treating the effects of Patricia's secret medication without understanding the cause. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, Emma's longtime pediatrician, provided expert testimony about the medical dangers of the unauthorized diet pills and laxatives Patricia had been administering. The medications this child was given without medical supervision could have caused serious cardiac complications, electrolyte imbalances, and permanent digestive damage, Dr. Walsh explained. The fact that these drugs were administered secretly in combination with psychological manipulation about weight and appearance indicates a deliberate pattern of medical abuse. The medical testimony was crucial because it demonstrated that Patricia's abuse of Emma wasn't limited to psychological manipulation. She had been physically endangering Emma's health for over a year while presenting herself as a concerned grandmother trying to help with weight management and healthy habits. Local domestic violence organizations also rallied to support our case, recognizing patterns in my family's behavior that matched their knowledge of systematic abuse tactics. The desert abandonment was an extreme example of isolation and endangerment, but the underlying patterns of control manipulation and psychological abuse are very common in toxic family systems, explained Dr. Sarah Martinez from the Riverside County Family Crisis Center. The perpetrators used emotional manipulation, false accusations, and threats of abandonment to maintain control over both the child and her mother. The professional analysis of my family's behavior helped me understand that their treatment of Emma and me wasn't just cruel or misguided. It followed established patterns of domestic abuse that had been documented and studied by experts in family violence and psychological manipulation. But the most touching community response came from children and teenagers who had heard Emma's story and found the courage to speak out about their own experiences with family abuse. A group of local high school students organized a support rally for Emma, sharing their own stories of psychological manipulation and emotional abuse by family members who claimed to be acting out of love and concern for their development. Emma's courage in standing up to her abusers inspired me to finally tell someone about what my stepfather has been doing to me, said one 17-year-old participant. I always thought I had to accept his treatment because he was family, but Emma showed me that family doesn't give people the right to hurt you. The rally generated additional reports of family abuse to local authorities, creating a ripple effect of accountability and healing that extended far beyond our specific case. As the community support continued growing, Emma received hundreds of letters from people across the country who'd been inspired by her strength and resilience. The letters came from abuse survivors, child advocates, legal professionals, and ordinary parents who wanted her to know that her courage was making a difference in other people's lives. Reading those letters together became part of Emma's healing process, helping her understand that her suffering hadn't been meaningless and that her decision to testify was helping other children escape similar abuse. "Mom, I never thought that surviving what they did to me could help other kids," Emma said while reading through another batch of supportive mail. "Maybe something good really can come out of something terrible." The community response had transformed Emma's ordeal from an isolated incident of family cruelty into a catalyst for broader awareness, prevention, and healing. Her story was helping other families recognize abuse, survivors find their voices, and communities develop better systems for protecting vulnerable children. But more importantly, the overwhelming support from strangers who cared about her welfare was helping Emma understand that love, protection, and community existed far beyond the toxic family dynamics she had been conditioned to accept as normal. The trial began on a crisp October morning exactly 4 months after Emma's rescue from the mine shaft. The courtroom was packed with community supporters, child advocates, and media representatives who had followed our story from the beginning. As we took our seats in the victims section, I squeezed Emma's hand and marveled at the composed, confident young woman she had become through this ordeal. District Attorney Rachel Morrison had assembled an overwhelming case against Patricia, Harold, and Susan. The evidence included hours of audio recordings, digital communications, medical records, witness testimony, and expert analysis that painted a complete picture of systematic child abuse disguised as traditional family discipline. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," DA Morrison began in her opening statement, "this case is not about family disagreements or generational differences in parenting philosophy. This case is about 3 adults who systematically planned and executed a scheme to terrorize a 16-year-old child through deliberate abandonment in life-threatening conditions with the specific intent to break her spirit and force her submission to their absolute control." The prosecution's opening statement outlined the timeline of abuse from Patricia's secret administration of unauthorized medication to the coordinated psychological manipulation campaign culminating in the desert abandonment that nearly cost Emma her life. But it was Emma's testimony that provided the most powerful evidence against my family. Taking the witness stand with remarkable composure, Emma methodically described years of psychological abuse, the systematic undermining of her relationship with me, and the calculated cruelty of their character-building abandonment in conditions they knew could be fatal. "They didn't abandon me in the desert to teach me survival skills or self-reliance," Emma testified clearly. "They abandoned me there because they wanted me to be so terrified and desperate that I would never question their authority again. They wanted me to believe that challenging them meant losing all protection and potentially dying alone." Emma's testimony was particularly effective because she spoke without visible anger or desire for revenge. She simply described what had happened to her in factual terms, allowing the jury to understand the premeditated nature of their abuse without being distracted by emotional theatrics. The defense attorneys attempted to portray my family as well-meaning grandparents and aunt who had made errors in judgment while trying to help a troubled teenager develop better behavior and attitudes. But this strategy backfired spectacularly when Patricia, Harold, and Susan took the witness stand in their own defense. Patricia's testimony revealed her complete inability to understand or acknowledge the severity of her actions. Emma needed to learn respect for family authority and appreciation for the comfortable life she had been given. Patricia testified with obvious conviction. Modern parenting methods have created a generation of entitled, disrespectful children who think they can challenge adults without consequences. We were trying to provide the firm guidance that Emma's mother had failed to give her. When Prosecutor Morrison pressed Patricia about whether she understood that Emma could have died in the desert, Patricia's response shocked even the defense attorneys. If Emma had died because she refused to follow simple survival instructions, that would have been a tragic but educational outcome for other children who might consider similar disrespectful behavior, Patricia said matter-of-factly. Sometimes the most effective lessons require real consequences, not artificial punishments that can be easily dismissed. The jury's visible reaction to Patricia's casual discussion of Emma's potential death as an acceptable teaching tool was immediate and damning. Several jury members appeared physically uncomfortable as Patricia continued defending her decision to prioritize Emma's attitude adjustment over her basic survival. Harold's testimony was equally destructive to their defense strategy. "I have 40 years of experience in that desert environment," Harold testified. "I knew exactly how challenging those conditions would be for someone Emma's age and fitness level. The point was to put her in a situation where she would have to rely on family guidance and protection to survive, rather than taking those things for granted." When Morrison asked Harold whether he had considered the possibility that Emma might not survive the experience, his response provided prosecutors with a clear admission of depraved indifference. "I calculated the risks carefully," Harold said. "Based on my research into survival statistics and heat exposure timelines, Emma had approximately a 70% chance of surviving if she made reasonable decisions and maintained proper attitude. Those seemed like acceptable odds for the educational value she would gain from the experience." Harold's testimony revealed that he had literally calculated acceptable casualty rates for their abuse, treating Emma's potential death as a statistical outcome in their character-building experiment rather than recognizing her fundamental right to safety and protection. But Susan's testimony provided the most damaging evidence of their systematic planning and malicious intent. "We spent months documenting Emma's behavioral problems and researching appropriate intervention strategies," Susan testified, apparently believing this demonstrated responsible planning rather than premeditated abuse. "We consulted legal resources to ensure our methods stayed within acceptable boundaries of parental authority, and we prepared comprehensive documentation to justify our actions if questioned by outside authorities." Susan's detailed description of their research into legal boundaries of child discipline, their coordination of stories and evidence, and their preparation for potential investigations revealed the calculated nature of their abuse campaign. "We knew that if we framed Emma's desert experience as a character-building exercise rather than punishment, we could justify almost any level of discomfort or fear as educational rather than abusive." Susan continued, apparently unaware that she was providing prosecutors with a complete confession of their manipulative strategies. The defense attorney's attempts to limit their client's testimony came too late. Patricia, Harold, and Susan had already provided detailed admissions of premeditated child endangerment, depraved indifference to Emma's life, and systematic psychological abuse designed to break her spirit through terror and isolation. But the most dramatic moment of the trial came during cross-examination, when Prosecutor Morrison played the audio recording Emma had captured during her ordeal underground. Emma's frightened voice filled the courtroom as she described her growing desperation and fear of dying alone in the mine shaft. But the most powerful portion was the clear recording of Harold and Susan discussing whether to reveal Emma's location based on how much additional suffering they thought she needed to endure. "She's still conscious and moving around down there," Harold's voice said clearly through the courtroom speakers. "The lesson isn't complete if she hasn't really suffered for her disrespect. Let's give her another few hours to think about her attitude." Susan's recorded response was equally damning. "If she dies down there, we'll say she wandered off because she was being rebellious. Everyone knows teenagers make stupid decisions. But if she lives through this, she'll never challenge our authority again." The recording continued with their discussion of acceptable timelines for Emma's suffering coordination of their cover story, and casual speculation about whether her death would serve their educational objectives better than her survival. As Emma's terrified voice alternated with Harold and Susan's cold calculations about her suffering and potential death, several jury members were visibly emotional. The contrast between a child's desperate fight for survival and adults discussing her ordeal as a successful teaching tool was stark and devastating. When the recording concluded, the courtroom was completely silent except for the sound of Emma quietly crying beside me. Not from reliving the trauma, but from finally hearing validation that what had been done to her was as wrong and cruel as she had known it to be. The defense's closing arguments attempted to portray my family as misguided relatives who had made poor decisions while trying to help a troubled teenager, but the evidence of premeditation calculation and complete indifference to Emma's life made those arguments impossible to sustain. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges: felony, child endangerment, reckless, endangerment with great bodily harm, conspiracy to commit child abuse, making false reports to emergency services, and illegal dispensing of controlled substances to a minor. Judge Williams' sentencing reflected the severity of their crimes and their complete lack of remorse. The defendants have shown no understanding of the gravity of their actions, no empathy for their victims' suffering, and no acceptance of responsibility for crimes that could have resulted in the death of a child, Judge Williams stated. Their continued justification of systematic abuse as legitimate discipline demonstrates an ongoing threat to public safety and child welfare. Patricia was sentenced to 8 years in state prison. Harold received 7 years. Susan was sentenced to 6 years. All 3 were also ordered to pay full restitution for Emma's medical expenses, therapy costs, and educational support, and were prohibited from any contact with Emma until she reached age 25. As the sentences were read, my family showed no emotion except mild annoyance at the inconvenience of their imprisonment. Even facing years in prison, they maintained their conviction that they had been victims of persecution rather than perpetrators of child abuse. But Emma's reaction to the verdict was the most important outcome of the entire legal process. "Mom, does this mean they can never hurt me again?" Emma asked as we left the courthouse. "Yes, sweetheart," I replied. "They can never hurt you again. And more importantly, you helped make sure they can never hurt any other children the way they hurt you." Emma smiled with a peace and confidence that had been missing for years. "Good. I'm glad I was brave enough to tell the truth. Other kids deserve to be safe too." As we walked out of the courthouse into the California sunshine, I realized that justice hadn't just been served through the criminal convictions. Justice had been served through Emma's courage in refusing to accept abuse as love, her strength in testifying to protect other children, and her wisdom in understanding that real family protects rather than destroys. The trial was over, but our healing was just beginning. The civil lawsuit I filed against Patricia, Harold, and Susan was about more than financial compensation for Emma's suffering. It was about establishing legal precedents that would protect other children from similar abuse and ensuring that my family faced comprehensive consequences for their systematic campaign of psychological and physical endangerment. Attorney Jennifer Walsh, who specialized in family violence and child abuse cases, helped me understand the broader implications of our civil action beyond the criminal convictions. Civil litigation allows us to address the full scope of damages your family inflicted on Emma, including long-term therapy needs, educational support, and compensation for pain and suffering, Attorney Walsh explained. But equally importantly, civil judgments create financial accountability that often motivates behavioral change more effectively than criminal penalties. The civil case also provided opportunities to seek additional legal protections that the criminal court couldn't offer. We filed for permanent restraining orders that would remain in effect even after my family's eventual release from prison, ensuring Emma's safety well into her adult years. But my most significant legal action involved Emma's inheritance from her deceased father. Through forensic accounting, we discovered that Patricia, Harold, and Susan had been systematically stealing from Emma's trust fund for over 3 years. The money intended for her college education and future security had been used to finance their luxury camping equipment, expensive vacations, and even the desert camping trip where they nearly killed her. The financial abuse preceded and funded the physical abuse. Attorney Walsh observed as we reviewed bank records and forged documents. They stole your daughter's inheritance to pay for the very experiences they used to terrorize her. The calculation behind their cruelty is breathtaking. The stolen funds totaled over $80,000 money that should have been growing in secured educational accounts, but had instead financed my family's comfortable lifestyle while they planned increasingly sophisticated ways to abuse Emma. But the most important legal action involved Emma's name and identity. I want to legally change my name to remove any connection to their family line, Emma said during one of our strategy sessions with Attorney Walsh. I don't want to carry their name into my adult life, and I don't want my future children to have any link to people who tried to kill me for asking questions. The name change process became an opportunity for Emma to reclaim her identity and autonomy after years of psychological manipulation designed to make her question her own worth and judgment. Choosing her new name was an act of self-determination that symbolized her freedom from their control. We also pursued legal disownment procedures that would permanently sever any inheritance rights my family might claim to Emma's future assets or estate. The legal documentation would ensure that their abuse of her couldn't be rewarded with financial benefit even decades in the future. But perhaps the most satisfying legal action involved exposing their broader pattern of fraud and deception. The investigation into Emma's trust fund led to discoveries of tax evasion, insurance fraud, and systematic financial manipulation that extended far beyond their abuse of Emma. Patricia had been claiming Emma as a dependent on her tax returns while stealing money from Emma's accounts. Harold had lied on insurance applications about his medical history and driving record. Susan had been collecting disability benefits while working under the table in cash-based businesses. Your family's abuse of Emma was part of a broader pattern of fraud, deception, and exploitation, Attorney Walsh explained. The civil litigation has uncovered evidence that will likely result in additional criminal charges and federal tax prosecution. The comprehensive legal consequences they faced would extend far beyond their sentences for child abuse. They would emerge from prison to face garnished wages, seized assets, and ongoing federal investigations that could result in additional prison time. But the most important aspect of taking legal control was establishing Emma's autonomy and decision-making authority over her own life and future. Emma is old enough to have input into all legal decisions that affect her, Attorney Walsh explained. Rather than making choices for her, we're going to make sure she understands her options and supports the decisions we make on her behalf. Emma's participation in the legal process became part of her recovery and empowerment. Understanding her rights, learning about legal protections, and making informed decisions about her own case helped her develop confidence in her ability to navigate complex situations without manipulation or coercion. The civil trial provided Emma with another opportunity to testify about their systematic abuse, but this time her testimony focused on the long-term impacts of their treatment, rather than just the immediate details of the desert abandonment. They didn't just try to kill me physically, Emma testified during the civil proceedings. They spent years trying to kill my spirit, my confidence, and my relationships with people who really loved me. The desert was just the final escalation of abuse that had been building my entire life. Emma's testimony about the psychological manipulation, the secret medication, the financial theft, and the systematic undermining of our relationship painted a complete picture of coordinated family abuse that went far beyond any single incident of poor judgment. The civil jury's award of $250,000 in compensatory and punitive damages reflected their understanding that Emma had survived a comprehensive campaign of abuse designed to destroy her sense of self-worth and autonomy. But more important than the financial award was the legal precedent our case established for holding family members accountable for systematic psychological abuse disguised as legitimate discipline. This case demonstrates that family relationships don't provide immunity from criminal and civil liability for child abuse, explained Judge Martinez during his final ruling. Adults who use their positions of trust and authority to systematically terrorize children will face comprehensive legal consequences regardless of their claimed motivations or family status. As we concluded the civil proceedings, Emma asked a question that showed how much she had grown through the process of seeking justice. "Mom, do you think they understand now that what they did was wrong?" The question required careful consideration. "Honey, I think they understand that what they did has consequences," I replied. "Whether they understand that it was wrong is less important than whether other adults learn from their example that child abuse will be prosecuted to the full extent of the law." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "I guess the most important thing is that other kids will be safer because we didn't let them get away with hurting me." Her perspective on justice as protection for future victims rather than revenge against past abusers demonstrated the remarkable moral clarity and maturity Emma had developed through surviving and confronting their systematic abuse. As we left the courthouse after the final civil ruling, Emma walked with the confident posture of someone who had faced down powerful adversaries and won. She had not only survived their attempt to break her spirit, she had helped ensure they would face comprehensive consequences for their crimes while establishing legal protections for other children in similar situations. "Mom," Emma said as we reached the car, "I feel like I can handle anything now. If I can survive what they did to me and still stand up for what's right, I can face whatever challenges come next in my life." Her strength, courage, and moral clarity filled me with pride and hope for her future. My family's attempt to destroy Emma had instead forged her into exactly the kind of strong, independent, ethical person they had feared she might become. 8 months after the criminal convictions, Emma and I moved to Portland, Oregon, far from the desert landscapes and toxic family influences that had defined too much of our lives. The move represented more than geographical distance. It was a conscious choice to build our future in a place where we could define ourselves by our own values rather than constantly defending against manipulation and control. Emma's transition to Lincoln High School exceeded all expectations. Free from the constant psychological pressure of my family's criticism and manipulation, her natural intelligence and resilience flourished in ways I had never seen before. "Your daughter is remarkable," explained Dr. Catherine Wilson, Emma's new therapist, during one of our family sessions. The fact that she maintained her moral clarity and sense of self-worth through systematic psychological abuse demonstrates extraordinary inner strength. Most children who survive that level of manipulation struggle with trust and self-confidence for years. Emma's therapy focused not on reliving trauma, but on understanding healthy relationships and recognizing manipulation tactics that might resurface in future friendships, romantic relationships, or professional situations. She was learning to trust her own judgment while developing skills to identify and respond to controlling behavior. But perhaps the most significant aspect of Emma's healing involved her growing confidence in her own voice and opinions. "I used to second-guess everything I thought or felt because they convinced me that my perceptions were wrong and my feelings were invalid," Emma explained during one of our conversations. "Now I understand that questioning authority isn't disrespectful when that authority is being abusive or unreasonable." Emma's academic performance reflected her psychological healing. Free from Harold's constant assertions that she was too stupid for higher education, she enrolled in advanced placement classes and began exploring college options with the confidence of someone who understood her own capabilities and worth. Her eating disorder caused by Patricia's secret medication and psychological manipulation about weight and appearance required specialized treatment that addressed both the physical damage and the underlying body image distortions. But Emma's progress was remarkable once she understood that her grandmother's comments about her appearance had been deliberately designed to destroy her self-esteem rather than help her develop healthy habits. I look in the mirror now and see myself instead of hearing Grandma Patricia's voice telling me I'm fat and ugly, Emma said during one of our therapy sessions. It's amazing how quiet my own thoughts can be when other people aren't constantly criticizing and controlling them. Emma's social relationships also blossomed in the healthier environment we had created. Without my family's constant interference and judgment, she developed friendships based on mutual respect and genuine compatibility rather than trying to manage other people's opinions about our family dynamics. Her new friends at Lincoln High School knew nothing about our traumatic past unless Emma chose to share those experiences. She could be seen and valued for her humor, intelligence, and kindness rather than being defined by her survival of family abuse. It's weird how normal my life feels now, Emma observed during one of our evening conversations. I used to think drama and conflict were just part of family relationships because that's all I had ever known. Now I understand that healthy families actually support and protect each other instead of creating constant stress and fear. Emma's insight into healthy family dynamics was particularly remarkable because she had developed this understanding despite having no positive family models during her childhood. Her ability to recognize and create healthy relationships demonstrated the strength of her natural emotional intelligence. But perhaps the most healing aspect of our new life was Emma's decision to volunteer with a local organization that supported teenage victims of family abuse. I want other kids to know that survival is possible and that the abuse isn't their fault, Emma explained when she applied to become a peer counselor. If my story can help someone else recognize that they deserve better treatment, then maybe something good really can come from what happened to me. Emma's volunteer work became a powerful part of her own healing process. Helping other teenagers understand their rights, recognize manipulation tactics, and develop safety plans gave her a sense of purpose and agency that transformed her from victim to advocate. The other teenage survivors Emma worked with often expressed amazement at her confidence and clarity about healthy relationships. Many of them had never seen someone their own age who had successfully escaped family abuse and built a stable, happy life afterward. Emma gives us hope, explained Maria, a 17-year-old who had escaped her own abusive family situation. She shows us that you can survive terrible treatment and still become a strong, happy person who trusts herself and builds good relationships. Emma's impact on other survivors demonstrated that her healing wasn't just personal. It was creating ripples of hope and empowerment that extended far beyond her own recovery. My own healing process involved learning to recognize and trust my own parenting instincts after years of being told that my protective impulses were overreaction and that my family's abuse was legitimate guidance I should appreciate and support. You've spent decades being told that your perceptions of their behavior were wrong, explained my therapist, Dr. Sarah Martinez. Learning to trust your own judgment again and set appropriate boundaries requires practice and patience with yourself. The process of rebuilding my confidence as a mother and protector was gradual but transformative. Every decision I made based on Emma's actual needs and interests, rather than trying to manage my family's opinions and reactions, felt like a small victory of independence and clarity. Emma and I also worked together to create new family traditions that reflected our own values rather than trying to navigate the toxic dynamics of extended family gatherings. Holiday celebrations became peaceful, joyful occasions focused on gratitude and connection rather than survival and damage control. I love our quiet Christmas mornings, Emma said during our second holiday season in Portland. No one is criticizing anyone. No one is creating drama, and we can just enjoy each other's company without worrying about who's going to start a fight or make someone cry. Our new traditions were simple but meaningful: cooking together, hiking in the beautiful Pacific Northwest landscapes, reading books and discussing ideas without fear of judgment or manipulation. The absence of constant conflict and criticism allowed us to discover who we actually were when we weren't defending ourselves from attack. But perhaps the most significant aspect of our healing was Emma's growing understanding of her own worth and potential. I used to think I had to earn love by being perfect and never questioning anything. Emma reflected during one of our conversations about her college applications. Now I understand that real love doesn't require perfection, and healthy relationships actually encourage questions and growth. Emma's college essay about overcoming family abuse and finding her own voice was powerful and inspiring. Several admissions counselors told us that her story of resilience and moral courage stood out among thousands of applications because it demonstrated genuine character development and commitment to helping others. As Emma prepared for her senior year of high school with college acceptances already arriving, I marveled at the confident, compassionate, intelligent young woman she had become, despite everything my family had tried to do to break her spirit. "Mom, do you ever regret cutting them out of our lives?" Emma asked during one of our evening walks through our peaceful Portland neighborhood. The question was important and deserved careful consideration. "No, sweetheart," I replied. "I regret that it took me so long to recognize that protecting you from their abuse was more important than maintaining family relationships. I regret that you had to survive their cruelty for as long as you did, but I will never regret choosing your safety and well-being over their comfort and control." Emma nodded with the wisdom of someone who had learned the difference between genuine family love and toxic manipulation disguised as tradition. "I'm glad we're building our own family now," Emma said with a peaceful smile, one based on love and respect instead of fear and control. As we reached our front porch and Emma headed inside to work on her homework, I realized that our healing wasn't just about recovering from past trauma. It was about creating a future filled with genuine love, mutual respect, and the kind of safety that allows people to become their best selves without fear of abandonment or punishment for growing into their own strength. 2 years after our move to Portland, Emma graduated as valedictorian of Lincoln High School with a full scholarship to Stanford University. As I watched her deliver her commencement speech about resilience, courage, and the importance of protecting vulnerable people, I felt overwhelming pride in the extraordinary young woman she had become. "Adversity doesn't build character," Emma said to her graduating classmates. "Adversity reveals character. The choices we make when facing cruelty, injustice, and abandonment show who we really are and who we choose to become. I chose to become someone who protects rather than destroys, who builds up rather than tears down, and who uses her voice to defend people who haven't yet found their own." Emma's speech received a standing ovation, but more importantly, it demonstrated the wisdom and moral clarity she had gained through surviving and overcoming systematic family abuse. She had transformed her suffering into strength and her trauma into a mission to protect others. The legal consequences for Patricia, Harold, and Susan extended far beyond their prison sentences. The federal tax prosecution resulted in additional convictions for fraud and conspiracy. Their assets were seized to pay restitution-backed taxes and penalties that would follow them for the rest of their lives. They emerged from prison to face garnished wages, foreclosed properties, and destroyed credit that effectively ended the comfortable lifestyle they had funded through theft and manipulation. But more importantly, their criminal convictions created legal precedents that strengthened child protection laws and helped other families recognize and prosecute similar abuse. Our case was cited in legal journals, family advocacy publications, and training materials for law enforcement officers who investigate child endangerment. Detective Martinez, who had become a friend during our legal journey, contacted us regularly with updates about how our case was being used to train other professionals in recognizing systematic family abuse. Emma's courage in testifying has helped convict 3 other families who were using similar psychological manipulation tactics against their children. Detective Martinez reported during one of her visits to Portland. Her willingness to speak out created a ripple effect of accountability that's protecting kids across the entire region. Emma's volunteer work with teenage abuse survivors had expanded into a formal nonprofit organization that she founded during her senior year of high school. The Emma Johnson Foundation for Family Safety provided resources, support, and legal assistance to children escaping abusive family situations. I want every kid to know that survival is possible, healing is real, and they deserve to be loved without conditions or control. Emma explained during the Foundation's inaugural fundraising dinner. No child should have to choose between safety and family, between protecting themselves and maintaining relationships with people who hurt them. The Foundation's work attracted attention from child advocacy organizations across the country. Emma was invited to speak at conferences, consulted on policy development, and featured in national media coverage about recognizing and preventing family abuse. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from a handwritten letter Emma received from a 15-year-old girl in Arizona whose family had seen our story in the news. "Dear Emma," the letter began, "my grandparents were planning to take me on a camping trip to teach me respect and gratitude, and they kept talking about the lessons you learned in the desert. But after my mom read about what really happened to you, she realized they were planning to hurt me too. Your story saved my life before they could even try to take it. Thank you for being brave enough to tell the truth." Reading that letter together, Emma and I both cried tears of gratitude that her suffering had prevented another child from experiencing similar abuse. Her courage in surviving and speaking out was literally saving lives and protecting vulnerable children she would never meet. Emma's college years at Stanford were marked by academic excellence, leadership in student organizations, and continued advocacy for child protection and family safety. She majored in psychology and legal studies, preparing for a career in family law and child advocacy that would allow her to professionally protect other children from the abuse she had survived. "I want to become the kind of lawyer who helps kids escape dangerous families and build safe, healthy lives," Emma explained during one of our conversations about her future plans. "I want other children to have advocates who understand what they're going through and will fight as hard for their safety as you fought for mine." Emma's relationship with me had deepened and matured into the kind of mutual respect and genuine affection that my family had tried to destroy through their manipulation tactics. We talked regularly about everything from academic challenges to relationship advice, and Emma often sought my perspective on complex decisions while maintaining her independence and confidence in her own judgment. "You know what I've learned about real family?" Emma asked during one of our visits when she was home from college. "Real family means that people want you to become the strongest, happiest, most successful version of yourself, even if that means you don't need their protection anymore. Fake family tries to keep you weak and dependent so they can control you." Her insight perfectly captured the difference between genuine love and manipulative control. Real family celebrates growth and independence. Toxic family punishes strength and autonomy to maintain dominance and dependency. Emma's romantic relationships were healthy and balanced, characterized by mutual respect, open communication, and support for each other's goals and dreams. She had learned to recognize manipulation tactics and controlling behavior, protecting herself from partners who might try to replicate the abuse patterns she had escaped. "I know what love looks like now," Emma said when she introduced me to her boyfriend during her junior year. "It looks like someone who celebrates your successes, supports your dreams, and makes you feel stronger and more confident rather than smaller and more dependent." As Emma approached graduation from Stanford with honors and acceptances to several top law schools, I reflected on the journey we had traveled together from the nightmare in the desert to the bright future she was creating through her own courage and determination. The phone call that brought our story full circle came on a quiet Sunday morning during Emma's senior year. Detective Martinez called to inform us that Patricia had died in prison from complications related to diabetes, a condition she had hidden from medical authorities for years to avoid treatment costs and maintain her image of health and vitality. "She never acknowledged responsibility for what she did to Emma," Detective Martinez reported. "Even in her final medical interviews, she maintained that you and Emma were the real problems, and that her only mistake was not being firm enough with both of you earlier." Patricia's death without remorse or recognition of her crimes was somehow fitting. She had lived her entire life believing that her comfort and control were more important than other people's safety and dignity, and she died without ever understanding that love protects rather than destroys. Harold and Susan were released from prison after serving their full sentences, but their post-incarceration lives were characterized by poverty, social isolation, and the ongoing legal consequences of their financial crimes. They made no attempts to contact Emma or me, apparently understanding that their abuse had permanently severed any possibility of relationship or reconciliation. I used to wonder if I would feel satisfied when they faced consequences for hurting me. Emma reflected when we discussed their current situations. But I've realized that my happiness doesn't depend on their suffering. My healing came from building a life based on love and purpose, not from watching them pay for their cruelty. Emma's perspective on justice and healing was remarkably mature and healthy. She understood that true recovery meant building something positive rather than dwelling on punishment for past wrongs. As Emma prepared for law school and her career in child advocacy, she asked me a question that perfectly encapsulated the wisdom she had gained through surviving and overcoming systematic abuse. "Mom, what do you think is the most important lesson someone should learn from our story?" I considered the question carefully before answering. I think the most important lesson is that family isn't defined by blood relationships or traditional obligations. Real family is defined by love, protection, respect, and the commitment to help each other become the best versions of ourselves. When people who claim to be family are actually destroying your spirit, your safety, or your sense of worth, the most loving thing you can do is protect yourself and the people you truly care about by refusing to accept abuse disguised as tradition. Emma nodded thoughtfully. And children should know that they deserve to be safe, loved, and respected, no matter what adults tell them about earning those things through obedience and submission. Exactly, I replied. Love never threatens abandonment or endangers safety to prove its authority. Real love protects, nurtures, and celebrates your strength rather than trying to break your spirit to maintain control. As Emma headed back to campus for her final semester before law school, I watched her drive away with pride and gratitude for the incredible young woman she had become, despite everything my family had tried to do to destroy her confidence and independence. Our story had begun with betrayal, abandonment, and attempted psychological murder in the desert heat. But it had ended with justice, healing, and the kind of genuine family relationship built on mutual respect and unconditional love. Emma had not only survived her ordeal, she had transformed it into a mission to protect other vulnerable children from similar abuse. Her courage in speaking out had created ripples of accountability and healing that would protect countless other families for generations to come. But perhaps the most beautiful aspect of our journey was the simple fact that Emma and I had learned to love and trust each other without conditions, manipulation, or control. We'd built the kind of family relationship that celebrates growth, supports dreams, and provides safety without demanding submission in return. Standing in our peaceful Portland home surrounded by photographs of Emma's achievements and letters from the children her advocacy work had helped protect, I realized that the greatest victory over my family's cruelty was not their punishment, but our healing. We had proven that love could triumph over hatred, that strength could emerge from trauma, and that real family could be created by choice rather than inherited through obligation. Emma's story was ultimately about more than surviving abuse. It was about the courage to recognize that we deserve better treatment than we've been taught, to accept the strength to protect ourselves and others from people who would harm us in the name of love, and the wisdom to build relationships based on genuine care rather than manipulative control. If you've experienced similar treatment from family members or other people who claim to care about you, I want you to know that healing is possible. Justice is achievable, and you deserve to be surrounded by people who celebrate your strength rather than trying to break your spirit. Your safety and well-being are more important than maintaining relationships with people who hurt you, no matter what they claim their motivations to be. What aspects of family relationships do you think are most important for creating genuine love and safety? Have you ever had to choose between maintaining family connections and protecting your own well-being? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you or someone you know who might be experiencing family abuse, please like this video to help spread awareness about recognizing and preventing systematic psychological manipulation, disguised as traditional discipline. Subscribe to hear more stories about overcoming adversity and building healthy relationships, and share this video with anyone who might benefit from understanding the difference between genuine family love and toxic control. Thank you for taking the time to hear Emma's story and mine. I hope that sharing our journey from darkness to healing provides hope and encouragement for anyone who is still fighting to protect themselves or someone they love from family abuse disguised as traditional values. Remember that your worth isn't determined by your ability to tolerate mistreatment, and real love never requires you to sacrifice your safety, dignity, or dreams to prove your loyalty. Stay strong, trust your instincts, and never stop believing that you deserve to be loved without conditions or control.